right, Karen, let's take a look at the internet weather for this week. So I'm not going to go over like every single port because obviously there are a bunch here that we see all the time. So like Telnet, your Windows file sharing on 445, SSH. We see lots of activity with the Internet of Things devices, especially on Telnet and SSH. A lot of WannaCry and other types of malware on the Microsoft file sharing port there. Remote desktop protocol, also often a target of brute force attack on 3389 TCP. The ones I was going to focus in on here is 5555 TCP, which is the Android debugger service, and then 8545 TCP, which is the Ethereum wallet called Geth. Those are probably more interesting. The one that I tend to look at a little bit more, or I like a little bit more to analyze, is the one with most sources probing. Because this indicates that there's a bunch of devices that have been told to all start scanning a specific port for some reason, which usually means that there's some sort of botnet or malware-related activity behind it. So again, we see a lot of ports that we've talked about before in the past. The 8080 TCP we have talked about recently. Most of this is related to the GPON router vulnerability. Again, 5555 TCP we'll take a closer look at. 37215 TCP we'll also take a closer look at. This is related to a Huawei vulnerability that's been kind of going on for about a year now, and it's kind of resurged again. So I thought we'd take a quick look at that. And then the last one I thought was really interesting to me, but I've marked it in green because it's actually not a problem, is 8888 UDP. So I thought we'd take a quick look at kind of like my discovery process and what I learned, because not everything that always shows up here is bad, and this is a good case of where something looks like it might be bad, but it's not. So I thought we'd take a close look, or take a closer look at that.
You mean security good news?
Yeah, it's good news in that it's not a problem, but sometimes things that are normal look like scanning, and I had never seen that before, but somehow it crept up into the top 10 there. So the Geth Ethereum wallet, so there's a piece of software called Geth that is a client wallet piece of software for the Ethereum cryptocurrency. And there's kind of a well-known vulnerability for it that if you expose that to the internet and you don't realize you're exposing it, that somebody can get into your wallet and steal your cryptocurrency, your Ethereum cryptocurrency out of it. There's not a lot of sources scanning on it. But it's a significant number. It's like 300,000 at some points, 750,000 scans per hour at the peak there. So if you are running the Geth client wallet, I recommend that if you haven't already, upgrade because it fixes the problem. Oh, and also I did pull up a news article. So around mid-June, there was a large breach related to this where attackers had identified enough wallets that they were able to actually steal about $20 million of Ethereum from these insecurely configured clients that we're talking about here. So just a good reason, evidence that you should really secure your wallet if you haven't already. So pay attention to that one.
Yeah, you would think that people would really pay attention to their...
Some people, you know, people that do the cryptocurrency and stuff, they might not be as, again, like we were talking about on some other things, they might not realize that it's exposing their support to the internet. And you know, it just happens, and maybe they're not really good about updating their software. So it happens. Here's the other one we're going to take a look at is the port 5555 TCP, which we've talked about before. This is the Android debug bridge. And we started to see a real uptick in this behavior. I want to say it's like maybe late January of 2018. So beginning of this year, it went from basically nobody looking for this port up to about 5,000 or 6,000 scan sources per hour. And it was kind of at a pretty kind of regular level there for a very long time. But then at some point, I guess early July, it looks like, it really took off. And there were a bunch more botnets that they realized, oh, you know, there's actually some devices here that are worth grabbing and scooping up into my botnet. So a bunch of other malware families had added that into their repertoire of their spreading capability. And then the next one was port 37215 TCP, which this has been known about for at least a year now, maybe even a little bit longer. There was a lot more activity last year in 2017, a big flurry of activity with scanning around this, and then it kind of trailed off, and everybody lost interest. And you can kind of see there's a steady state volume on the left here of just, there's a small number of devices, I would say maybe, I don't know, maybe 1,000, and not even, less than 1,000, maybe 100 to 200, something like that. And then around here, we started to see a lot of increase in this scanning activity within the past 2 months or something. Satori, which is a variant of Mirai, it's kind of like based on the Mirai code base, is scanning for this quite a bit actually lately. So one of the things that we have access to is we have honeypots that basically just sit out there on the internet and listen on every port and say, hey, if you want to talk to me, what do you got to say? So in one of our honeypots, this is a recent one, I think from today actually, even I grabbed it, where you can see how they're trying to exploit this Huawei device. And in the SOAP body here, you'll see that there's a new status URL XML tag here, and then they injected some code. And what is actually happening here is probably the device has a vulnerability where it's not sanitizing input properly, and it tries to, apply this new status URL, but instead it's executing this code, which what it does is it runs busybox wget, and it goes and fetches this file called /juno from this IP address, saves it to the machine, changes it so it's executable, and then he runs it with a parameter of Huawei. And I grabbed this because I was kind of curious, what is this piece of malware? So I went and fetched it from here. And this is the MD5 checksum. When I run it against VirusTotal, who did know about it, they flag it all as Mirai. It's kind of hard to see on the screen here, but all of these basically say Mirai, Mirai, Mirai. So I thought that was interesting, how that actually gets, exploited on those types of devices. And then the last one that's not a problem, but when I saw 8888 UDP, I was like, well, that's really weird. First of all, we don't normally see UDP. It's rare that you see it in the top scan sources, but seeing 8888 UDP just kind of like felt weird to me. So I have two pictures here. One's of like the last 180 days, and you can see that there is definitely an uptick in activity here, as opposed to what it had been, which was pretty consistent prior to that time. But one of the things to me that when I looked at this right away, I was like, oh, this doesn't look like a botnet to me. If you look at a lot of our other botnet activity that we had looked at recently, it kind of stays steady. You don't see these spiky, comey-like things. Almost looks like a comb, right?
Yeah.
Where it's got these tines in it. You don't normally see that with botnet-related activity. And when you zoom in, you can see that at 11 o'clock every day, it has this very pronounced spike. When I looked at the scan volumetric reports, so we collect scan volumetric reports on each of these ports when they get analyzed, I could see that what the start and end of the ranges that they were scanning all ended up being IPs that were associated with a company called Private Internet Access, which is a VPN service. And doing some digging, I got some of these packets. I looked at what they are. It's a single packet that has just one byte in it, where they send an A basically, and they get a response of an A. And here you can also see that I looked up this IP address. I could see it's the Montreal, Canada Private Internet Access was the IP that it was trying to communicate to. So long story short, what's actually happening, and I confirmed this by other people on the internet had also been talking about this, is that this is a ping feature as part of the Private Internet Access service. So it's legit, it's part of their service, but I guess it's interesting that the reason it showed up is they must be doing well. So they must have a lot more devices, people using Private Internet Access, and they have a really wide breadth of nodes across the world for people to use for VPN. So I thought that was interesting and just something to say, not everything's bad. And then once you actually dig into the details, you can kind of learn that, oh, this is a normal thing that's going on and something that can be kind of dismissed.
Sometimes it's good to find things that are at least neutral, since we're used to finding so many bad things.